According to documents from 1949, the Roland Doe possession case is one of the most terrifying and well-documented exorcisms in history. The story begins in 1938 in a quiet suburb of Maryland. A boy named Roland Doe was born into an ordinary, devout American family. His parents were practicing Christians, regular at church, devout in prayer. Baptism, confirmation, Sunday school, and catechism marked his milestones. The household lived by the rhythms of faith: morning prayers, evening prayers, confession when guilt touched their hearts. The crucifix hung above the fireplace, over the bed, and above the doorway. Roland was shy, gentle, quiet. Teachers described him as serious. Classmates remembered a polite, unassuming boy who never demanded attention. He loved to read, especially stories of saints and miracles. His parents encouraged this devotion, hoping their son would grow into a young man of virtue. But beneath his calm, something restless stirred. Roland was curious about the unseen. He explored spiritualism cautiously, reading books on the paranormal, learning about seances and Ouija boards. His parents warned him against dabbling, but they underestimated the boy's obsession with the supernatural. At the age of 12, Roland's curiosity became the first step into darkness. A family friend introduced him to a Ouija board. Initially, it was a game, a harmless diversion. Yet from the very first session, strange things happened. The planchette moved with uncanny precision. Letters formed words that seemed beyond his understanding. Faint noises echoed in the corners of the room: scratches, taps, whispers. Objects shifted slightly when no one touched them. He could not explain it, and he tried to tell himself it was his imagination. Over the following months, the phenomena intensified. Chairs tipped, doors slammed, windows rattled in the dead of night. The boy's bed shook violently while he slept. His parents tried to rationalize it. Perhaps a rodent in the walls, they said. Perhaps the wind. But soon, the events could not be ignored. Roland began speaking in a voice that was not his own: low, guttural, angry, layered with something ancient. He cursed in tongues he could not have known. He called out names of people in the house he had never met. Doctors were consulted. They examined him thoroughly. Neurological tests showed nothing abnormal. Psychological evaluations were inconclusive. They suggested stress, attention-seeking behavior, perhaps a mild dissociative disorder. But nothing explained the strength he exhibited, the knowledge he displayed, the ability to speak in languages he had never studied. By early 1949, the family could no longer cope. They contacted the church. A local Lutheran minister visited first. He observed Roland writhing on the bed, speaking in multiple voices, laughing manically in one moment, screaming in agony the next. Chairs moved across the floor. Windows rattled. The air in the room grew cold. The minister left shaken, calling for further ecclesiastical authority. The Catholic priests arrived. The first exorcism session began in May 1949. Roland was pale, trembling, yet alert, as though anticipating the battle. The priest raised the crucifix and began to chant prayers in Latin. Roland's voice answered, not his own. In August, the first attempts at an exorcism began. Priests documented Roland's physical state as frail and weak. He was just a young boy, wasting away. But during the rituals, something changed. This fragile child would suddenly display supernatural strength, lashing out with a force that seemed impossible. He would speak in guttural voices, sometimes in languages he'd never learned, like Latin. The priests were dealing with something they had only read about in ancient texts, something that defied all logic and reason. As the weeks turned into months, the situation spiraled into chaos. By September and October, the supernatural activity had reached a terrifying crescendo. The family home became a battleground. Furniture would be thrown across rooms by an unseen force. Windows would rattle as if in a hurricane, and the house would be filled with strange, foul odors. During the exorcism sessions, Roland's body would contort into unnatural positions, his limbs bending in ways that should have broken bones. The priests, seasoned men of faith, were visibly shaken, their faces etched with a mixture of terror and grim determination. Imagine trying to hold down a thrashing child who suddenly possesses the strength of several grown men, all while he screams blasphemies at you in an inhuman voice. The climax of this horrifying ordeal arrived in mid-October. During one particularly intense session, the entity possessing Roland did something truly insidious. It began to reveal the deepest, darkest secrets of the priests present in the room. Sins they had confessed to no one, personal failings they thought were buried forever, were suddenly being broadcast by this possessed boy. You can picture the scene. The priests' faces, once filled with righteous conviction, now showing shock and disbelief. How could this child know these things? The entities seemed to be playing a cruel psychological game, using their own guilt and shame against them, mocking their faith and their very souls. It wasn't just a physical battle anymore. It was a spiritual and mental assault. After these brutal sessions, November brought a strange and unsettling calm, but it was far from over. Roland would appear weak and exhausted, his body bearing the physical toll of the ordeal. He looked like a survivor of some terrible trauma, which, in a way, he was. But these moments of peace were always short-lived. Just when the family thought it was over, a violent outburst would shatter the quiet. A plate would fly across the kitchen, or a crucifix on the wall would suddenly turn upside down. These sporadic events served as a chilling reminder that the entity was still there, lurking just beneath the surface, toying with them. It was a constant state of tension, never knowing when the next attack would come. Finally, as December approached, the exorcisms entered their final phase. The sessions were grueling, lasting for weeks. The priests, led by Father William Boder, relentlessly performed the rite, day after day, night after night. They were exhausted, both physically and spiritually, but they refused to give up on the boy. Then, one night, during a particularly violent session, something shifted. Roland, in a moment of lucidity, cried out, "He's gone!" The priest reported seeing a brilliant flash of light and hearing a loud, booming noise. And then, silence. The strange phenomena stopped. The scratching, the voices, the moving objects, it was all gone. Roland Doe went on to live a normal, quiet life. He reportedly has no memory of the events that transpired during his possession. He married, had children, and lived an unremarkable life, a stark contrast to the terrifying months that defined his childhood. But the story doesn't entirely end there. The priests involved kept detailed diaries and records of the exorcism. Tapes were recorded, capturing the unearthly sounds and voices. These artifacts remain, pieces of a puzzle that is still debated to this day. Was Roland Doe truly possessed by a demonic entity, or was it a case of severe, undiagnosed mental illness manifesting in a profoundly disturbing way? The evidence is there, but the answers are not so clear. Even after the final sessions, the house felt heavy with what had transpired. Silence had returned, but it was not peaceful. It was the quiet of something waiting, watching, coiled just beyond perception. Roland moved cautiously through his home, wary of shadows that seemed to linger longer than they should, of whispers he could almost hear when no one spoke. His parents, though relieved he was alive, were changed as well. Their eyes held a permanent shadow of fear, the knowledge that the boy they had raised had been touched by something incomprehensible. Roland's nights were the worst. Sleep offered no escape. He would wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, convinced he felt a presence in the room, a weight pressing against the bed, fingers brushing his arms. Sometimes, he would see reflections in the mirror that were not his own faces, twisted, gnarled, staring with hatred, vanishing when he blinked. At times, he could hear the voices again, soft at first, murmuring from the walls, from the air itself. They whispered secrets, mockeries, challenges. You cannot escape. We are always here. You belong to us. School became a battlefield. Friends noticed the subtle changes. His eyes, once bright with curiosity, now flickered with sudden shadows of fear or anger. Teachers remarked on his withdrawn demeanor, his tendency to startle easily at ordinary sounds. Occasionally, his voice would slip, just for a moment, into something deeper, harsher, layered with a resonance that sent chills through anyone nearby. Yet no one could explain it. No doctor could. No psychiatrist could. Roland's parents refused to speak of what had occurred with anyone outside the house, fearing ridicule, disbelief, or worse, attention from forces they did not want anywhere near their son again. Even the priests who had performed the exorcisms were changed. Father Williams and Father Walter H. carried the memory like a scar on their souls. They often revisited the transcripts and tapes, not for research, but to try to understand, to make sense of the darkness they had witnessed. Sometimes, late at night, they would hear a faint echo of a voice in Latin, a guttural growl layered beneath the prayer, and they would shiver, remembering that no ordinary child had been able to speak like that. Roland himself began to record his experiences in secret. Diary entries filled pages chronicling nightmares that felt as real as daylight dreams, where he was dragged through shadows into endless corridors filled with screaming faces, visions of fire and blood, of faceless figures whispering demands he could not obey. He detailed the nights when he woke screaming, when his body moved on its own, or when his voice had slipped for a moment into that ancient, commanding tone. He wrote about the way of knowing, even as a child, that something within him would never be entirely gone. Yet alongside the terror came a strange clarity. Roland realized that he had glimpsed a reality most people could never imagine. The limits of human strength, fear, and endurance had been tested. The exorcism had ended, but the lessons lingered about faith, mortality, and the thin veil separating the living from the unseen. He learned that even in silence, shadows could speak, and that evil, though defeated, might only sleep for a time. Visitors to the house sometimes reported unease. A neighbor would glance through the windows and feel a chill sweep through the room. A priest called for a blessing months later reported an unsettling stillness, a sense that something unseen was observing, waiting for a single misstep. Roland's parents avoided company, rarely spoke of the events, and installed crucifixes in every room. Yet even these gestures felt like fragile shields against forces beyond their understanding. Roland's adolescence was haunted. Ordinary moments carried echoes of the exorcism. A gust of wind down a hallway might sound like a whisper. A flicker of candlelight might appear to form a shadow moving toward him. He became acutely aware of the presence of unseen things, learning to live with caution, silence, and prayer. Despite this, he also developed an inner resilience, a keen awareness that the world contained more than human perception could grasp. By adulthood, Roland had grown into a quiet, contemplative man, marked forever by what he had endured. Though he avoided religious rites, he kept a small crucifix in his pocket, a talisman of the battle that had shaped his life. Yet he never fully escaped the memory, the voices, the levitations, the impossible strength, and the shadows that had filled his childhood home. Sometimes, in absolute silence, he could still hear a faint growl, a low whisper threading through his thoughts, a reminder that even the most harrowing exorcism might leave a mark no one can erase. The story of Roland Doe did not end with the exorcism. It continued in the quiet moments, in the lingering fear, in the shadows and whispers that never fully left. Scholars, priests, and curious minds would study the transcripts and tapes for decades. Some saw only a boy with psychological disturbance. Others saw undeniable proof of possession. For Roland, the truth was simple yet terrifying. He had faced darkness the world does not understand, and he had survived. But at a cost no one could measure. Even now, more than 70 years later, The case remains a benchmark for the study of the supernatural. The tapes circulate quietly among scholars of the occult. The priests who once performed the exorcism are long gone, but the story persists. And those who dare to read it, listen to it, or recount it, feel the lingering shadow of what happened in that Maryland home in 1949. A reminder that some forces, once awakened, never truly sleep.